back, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm debating which episode I want to do right now. I'm going to go with aliens today. Just thinking about it. Contemplating doing one on robots, but I think I want to think about that one for a little longer. Today's episode is going to be probably called Alien Intent. Now, it used to be humanity was very, very locked into super constrained methods of getting information. We had published books. Well, I guess the first thing we had was word of mouth. Then we had published books. Then they turned into paper with news on it. Isn't that kind of interesting when you slow down that thought and you're thinking, oh man, it's like sheets of paper with ink on them, and the ink says the news. And then we got radio, which was much easier to produce, right? Turn it on, broadcast, listen, And it was interesting because it was just like a solid state thing, a solid state machines that broadcast, solid state machines that picked up the signal and rebroadcast it into your room. And then we got technology to transmit pictures. And we got television. Took television quite a ways to get going. Before that, we even had movies, right? Silent movies, talkie movies. Why am I mentioning all these different media? It's because this is the very foundation of your knowledge about the potential existence or certainty of alien participation in our world, right? Now, I made an episode called Alien Promise, the Alien Promise. There's bound to be a little bit of overlap, but I'm going to try not to overlap it. What that episode's all about is man's desire and wish that a race would fall out of the sky and solve all of our maturity problems, technology problems, leadership problems, and pretty much take us to a state of utopia where we want for nothing. I'm not sure how intense we could get as human beings in that environment. I think, strife does produce some of the most amazing things in the world, and it's a horrible reality that we have so many incredible epiphanies and evolutions in talent coming out of strife. You like rock and roll? Well, came from the blues. You like the blues? Well, it came out of utter strife. It's called the blues for a reason, right? James Brown, he cited his financial ruin as the reason why he started taking kind of church music and beefing it up quite a bit. But poverty and suffering, either together or isolated, have created amazing inventions because people want the hell out of Dodge, right? So if you take away that particular constant of the universe, you may remove humanity. And you may remove the very fabric that we need to be human, which is why any definition of heaven is sort of cuckoo. But I wanted to get into aliens because I think there's a few fascinating things going on right now. What's funny is that I subscribe to Coast to Coast AM Facebook page. I used to subscribe to the channel. You get the feeds all day long, but they sort of have failed to make anything special for paying money every year. But George Norrie posted on Facebook, or whoever takes care of Facebook, posted that, isn't it weird that more recently, with all of the other things going on the internet, conspiracy-wise, that the sightings of aliens and the general frequency that aliens exist has sort of calmed down quite a bit. And I know some of you follow it, so you could argue, no, there's one out every single day. A new sighting, a new this, a new that. But before he posted that, I was talking to Kyle on the phone, and I said the exact same thing. I said, isn't it funny how it's all calmed down? Before the internet really got hot in exposing conspiracies and revealing how the world works and revealing who participates in running the world, well, shit. There was just television, really. If you wanted to see something about UFOs that wasn't completely fictional, you didn't go to the movie theater watch a UFO documentary half the time. And so you had complete fiction in the cinema, and television kind of fluctuates between documentary and the rebroadcast of either a movie or a show like X-Files, which goes knee-deep. And just to reiterate, government agencies get extremely powerful with your suspicion that they have alien spacecraft in some warehouse. They gain such a tremendous amount of power over you through just an undefined perception. Because even if you believed that, chances are you have no story to clamp onto to give yourself the details of what that means. You going to listen to Bob Lazar? John Lear, his buddy? Who are you going to listen to get any facts about what's going on internally? You know, John Lear thinks he sees every single imaginable thing he wants to see on the moon's surface. Like, he'll point at nothing on a moon surface photo. Can't you see? It's right there. Mickey Mouse is humping Donald Duck. I mean, the guy's just certifiable, right? It's weird. He's a guy that likes a tall tale. He does. But what I want to get into in this episode is sort of at the area that we don't talk about, because what has been the thrust of any documentary that claims that there's an alien visiting Earth? It's always very benign. It's always very, we don't have to commit to any details, which keeps us out of trouble. It's like a practice psyop, you know? Now, what is the evidence that we've ever seen aliens? What is it really? I think it's Ezekiel in the Bible. Has quite a few passages that seem pretty crazy. We have ancient paintings. We have some hieroglyphs where we believe there's things in the background that look a little suspicious. We have Mayan hieroglyphs that seem like people are inside things. Then we have photographs. As soon as photographs could be taken, you had unidentified flying objects. It would seem you would say that they were flying in shots. And what's really funny is when I grew up as a kid, they would always say that there was a photo expert, a photo analysis expert that says this is definitely a real object and it's not something thrown in the air. And now that we are 40 years past those claims, there's a ton of us that are Photoshop experts, 3D experts, special effects experts, and when you simply look at the collapsed pixels in an image, you know right away that this guy was either misquoted, doesn't exist, or full of shit. Because you could take an object and just throw it in the air, and there it is, right? And just keep taking the picture until you get a good one. And once you taught Jethro that he could make some money off this claim, you created an epidemic. Imagine the depressions going on and you're selling pencils and apples and you're standing in soup lines and someone says, if you can just get a camera from somebody and take a picture of a disc in the air, boy, government will give you some money, the press will give you some money. Come on. But what are some of the other pieces of evidence? Well, there's videotapes. There's video cameras, Super 8s, electronic, tape cameras, like the old VHS, Super 8 sort of stuff. Every form of camera in the world, right? Took pictures, took movies, and they took them before we had special effects available to every single human being. Like, for $50 a month, you can get the entire Adobe suite, and with that, After Effects and some finagling, man, you can create some stuff that no one can tell the difference. Yeah, blenders of 3D product packages, it's free. I mean, there really is no limitation to creating illusions today that could be mistaken for aliens. But there was a time when that wasn't available, and there was a pretty consistent flow of miraculous lights that happened to hug the surface of the earth. Very interestingly, crop circles started at some point. In fact, I can't remember when they started. I did research on that once. I can't remember what the number was. And then, of course, we have sightings. by military people, by normal people. We have some that seem to be extremely man-made. One of the more famous ones that I remember is a woman driving home on a highway in a crazy vehicle, triangle vehicle, I believe, was flying, being escorted by a bunch of helicopters, and it was emitting a horrible plume of energy below it, and she happened to look up into it, which is where the Richard Dreyfuss character in Close Encounters gets his face burned. It's based off her story, and she suffered burns and radiation, and it's probably some sort of covert vehicle using a horrible propulsion system that if the public knew the government built and flew around, they might be very in trouble, right? Put that badly. But way before that one, you have the classic Roswell, which we've talked about a couple times on the show. And again, my footnote on Roswell is, if you read all of the eyewitness accounts where people say for sure their family member was involved, for sure there was a deathbed confession, for sure my grandmother worked as a receptionist or secretary for this general, for this colonel, and he brought a box full of crazy things with alien writing on them. When you write down all of the stories that have ever been told, and this could be a different disinformation thing, I don't mean to take a crap on it, they so deviate in storyline that I find it hard to believe that anyone believes they've got the real story. Who was on this craft? Let's just say it existed, right? It crashes, which again, aliens seem to have a really hard time building spaceships. The reasons that they say this spacecraft crashed, I have read from being lightning from storms, as if they wouldn't build a vehicle that could withstand the normal atmospheric conditions of any planet. And then the famous radar, because radar was a big deal in 47. It was a brand new invention, and so it was romanticized as a weapon. Then you have Dr. Stephen Greer, who runs around in the 21st century saying, no, it was a radar. It just was a really powerful radar. Okay. All right, dude, it's almost 80 years later, and we don't have any amazing directed energy weapons that would be anything more intense, especially with ground-based radar. We had no satellites in space, so, come on. You're not tapping into the ionosphere. So all that's a cover story for maybe something that happened, maybe something that didn't happen, But this vehicle explodes supposedly from the inside. Again, what would cause that? Can't even imagine. Can't imagine. You can travel interdimensionally, you can travel through space, but you can't handle a lightning bolt and a little bit of wiggly electricity. Sure. But that story starts to deviate tremendously about what they found on the ground, where all the aliens were dead in one story. A couple of them are dead. One of them's alive. Two of them are alive. All of them are alive. It's put on a flatbed truck. It's flown to Dallas. It's flown to Kansas City. It's flown to Lawrence, Kansas. It's flown to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, I think, is the current topped-out theory. Hangar 18, But, of course, we have Area 51 and S4. All these stories. It just deviates like crazy. And, again, it'd be very easy in a PSYOP realm to make that the case, to cloud up the true facts of the situation. And then there's the other story that it was a Russian balloon that simply made it over here with some dummies in it, and they didn't want to admit that Russians had actually penetrated U.S. airspace, and so they created the UFO story as a cover. And I know there's a bunch of you just we're going to do an episode on Roswell at some point. This is about the alien intent. And I'm giving you a bedwork of some of these sightings because this is going to be the foundation of how we think about them, Yesterday, Coast to Coast posted that they had filmed over a volcano in infrared, and there's these little balls, and the balls kind of continually eject into space. I have talked about on this show several times about plasma energy, which is stored at the bowels of whatever we're on, right? And it is a sort of a stem cell energy that can be anything it needs to be. But in its purest form, it has an extremely high velocity. It is chrome in appearance. We filmed them several times. and they're spinning. So they get into this sort of like a lava lamp gravity well of their own creation, and they're usually spinning in a particular direction, which can make them look pancakey, like a disc, like a flying saucer. And as they interact with other electrical properties in the atmosphere, they will trigger what I believe to be sort of a gravity well around them, and they can zip around the atmosphere at tens of thousands of miles per hour, unresisted, stopping on a dime because the properties of where it's going to is the decided destination before its movement. And so they show up on radar. They absolutely freak out pilots, but they're just a natural phenomenon. They're just a natural release of internal energy from the Earth, right? Tesla conducted experiments to prove that the Earth has a plasma core. That's what his big experiment in Colorado was all about. Was putting an infinitesimal amount of electricity down into the Earth's crust and coaxing out, almost like a siphon, pretty much an infinite amount of electricity out of the ground, creating a lightning bolt that stood there for 1 minute until he severed the circuit. Can you imagine a lightning bolt going off for 1 minute? I mean, it is shocking when one happens for a split second, a fraction of time. But once he confirmed that, what did Tesla do? He left Colorado. So to analyze what an alien intent would be, there's a couple ways we can go at this, right? We have, on one set of data, everything that's ever been claimed to be a UFO. Everything that's ever been claimed to be alien abduction. You siphon all that together and try to create literally like an FBI profile on these beings. What is their overall mean of intent? How have the stories all correlated from people that have never met each other, from people that lived in completely different decades, perhaps even centuries, and see if there's some sort of consistency that we can trust in that data set, right? In the other data set, you have a more theoretical set of data, which is related to, I'm going to take some license here, to those of you who are a little more enlightened about this subject matter. You have thought past a lot of the basics of what it means to have an alien race contacting us. You are probably a person who has seen the majority, if not all of the Star Trek episodes, where alien life is treated intelligently, right? And so you have sort of gestated up a consciousness, which I believe Stephen Greer's group has done, regardless if that guy is in on something else. You think about it. You think about what it would like to be them and how you would, as a matter of a prime directive of some sort, which I think Gene Roddenberry did an amazing job creating, you would figure out how the protocol would go to contact us, right? So let's look at that prime directive for a split second, right? So the prime directive, if you're not familiar with it, which I can't imagine you're not, is a Star Trek entity that says the following: you're not allowed to contact an alien race on a planet unless they have discovered warp technology. Why warp technology? For those of you who don't know, warp means you can travel the speed of light or more. It's because they are joining the galaxy at that point, and they are participating in a larger collection of space folks, people on other planets and other galaxies, and they have to know the rules quite quickly. And so that's when they get notified that they're going to join potentially the Federation of Planets. But that's coming definitely from a human perspective, right? Human writers wrote the prime directive concept into a script that went on television that became Star Trek. And so that's essentially the data sets that we have to work out potentially. Let's just say you're a scientist, you're some sort of guru that's been hired by the government to say, okay, you have a lot of disciplines of science in you, and sociology and psychology and history, and you're to decipher what their intent might be without potentially having the conversation with them. Now, There is another theoretical data set, which are the people and the stories that claim that we have direct contact with them. Of course, it's always some unbelievable contact with just the United States government. All the governments of the world have said that there's unidentified flying objects, pretty much, if they're civilized and have the capability to fly in general. But to my knowledge, the only one that's really come forth and littered the internet and media with this notion of contacting them is the United States of America. There's a fabled story where I believe it was Eisenhower sent one of his men from the White House to Area 51 and said, find out what they're doing down there with aliens, and And that guy supposedly flies to Area 51 and is just sort of, oopsie, you're in a warehouse and there's a sort of gray alien there finishing up a conversation with the commander as he takes off in his vehicle with visibly other aliens with him, right? So let's see if we can't combine some of these concepts together. Let's go for the first data set, which is every photograph, movie, meaning amateur movie, of alien spacecraft, some of the fabled mythos of them talking to us, right? Let's think about that for a second. For whatever reason, they will not land in a highly populated area. Again, the Babylonians kind of have an alien sort of story, but they never said they were aliens. They just said this weird kind of supreme race comes out of the mountains and resets their society once the leadership gets corrupt. They kick out the leaders. It never talked about the penance of those people or that they were hauled away and put in jail. It just said that the society was reset. So that's the only thing I really know of in terms of that. People suspect that the pyramids are created by aliens, but if you study them, there's nothing. I mean, they're phenomenal engineering exercises, but it looks like whoever built them was, maybe the mathematics looked alien, but the construction was definitely very human, aside from the fact that they were precisely created. But they never said that they were, made by aliens. And here they are documenting absolutely everything. And just because a hieroglyph looks like an Apache helicopter, give me a break, people. Yeah, the aliens flight in Apache helicopters. Boy, you slam dunk that one. There's that one, for those of you guys who don't know, there's a hieroglyph that was multi-layered. It was said the wrong thing, and then somebody got in there and tried to overlay another message on it, and they ended up combining a bunch of symbols together. If you know hieroglyphs, you'll see what made the Apache helicopter. You'll see the two symbols that go together. It's well documented online, but then you just have someone go, but that's a lie. And it's like, no, it's not. The reason why it was covered up in the temple is because it was a messed up message. But so these aliens, with the first set of data, they just simply come and they visit and they look around and they go home. Now, that could be all that they would do. But now let's split some hairs here for a split second. They are not contacting us according to the first data set. Again, put aside the few stories that have come out more recently about how they have talked to some of us, right? So somehow they believe that they shouldn't contact us. It's sort of like they're following the Prime Directive. But now let's think about it. For any of you who've seen Star Trek, the Prime Directive has a couple ways it's dramatized, because there are accidental violations of the Prime Directive. Well, what's one of the simplest ways the Star Trek violates the Prime Directive? It's visual confirmation. Visual confirmation is the number one thing that they'll make a mistake. Either be it they're seen as a being, as a race, or they're seen as their ship gets in orbit, or a ship goes low down into the atmosphere and gets literally photographed. There's all kinds of different timetables that Star Trek puts the Enterprise. Well, based on that just basic human knowledge, right? Because we're supposedly inferior in thought to these aliens. They're violating their own Prime Directive. Well, not to say, let's just assume they have one, because they're not contacting us socially. They are touching base and constantly exposing themselves, except for more recently. And There's an extremely interesting correlation with what George Norrie said, that alien visitations have calmed down recently. Now let's think about it. As soon as the printing press came around, the amount of miracle messiahs stopped coming around as well. And that's because bullshit could be recorded, right? After the printing press came around, we essentially had prophets, right? Joseph Smith, people, that kind of thing, right? But people walking on water, creating miracles, just disappeared once that someone could record history and cross-reference stories and make sure that bullshit couldn't get through. So with video cameras and high-definition cameras being in every single cell phone, guess what also cut down quite a bit? Claims of UFOs. Now, it doesn't completely get rid of them, but it certainly increases the integrity and lowers the frequency of people who are bullshitting the system to make a buck, right? There's a very interesting weird wedge that was floating over Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in this last couple months. And who knows if it's CG. Supposedly it was taken from a couple different angles. Looks very weird. Doesn't have a propulsion system of any kind. Kind of a little flying wing. But isn't that interesting? Isn't it interesting that this correlation happens with a sudden reduction in alien sightings? Now, what a lot of you don't know, not you alien experts, but you folks that are sort of just normal old folk, is that there are a ton of art schools out there teaching 3D graphics, right? 3D imagery. And they are creating a bunch of sample reels to prove their capabilities in special effects. And we're getting them out of Russia and out of Mexico. These kids are incredibly talented, right? And they have figured out how to deceive the human eye. And this stuff's going online and making everyone think that there are new alien sightings in Mexico City, all over Russia, a bunch of other areas they have access to. And one of the techniques is that you shoot a stable shot of the environment and you put your special effects into that stable shot. You've locked the camera down on a tripod and you're taking a stable shot. Once you've pushed in all your special effects, masked everything out, meaning the alien spaceship can fly behind a building, fly behind a wire, fly in front of the wire, whatever you want to do for your shot. You then take the whole frame and you shrink the visibility and shake it. And it looks like it's a candid shot. And that's confusing a lot of people. There was a commercial made about I'm not sure exactly what the product was, but it was a plane that comes into a tropical airport and someone's on the beach and it's faked that this thing is coming in really wiggly and it almost hits a building and then lands and it's like, oh my God, can you believe this pilot's so amazing? Now I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, well, they're just trying to break us in. They're just trying to break us in and see how we respond to seeing them. And eventually we'll be mature enough and we will allow them in. Okay, well here's some holes in that little theory, okay? That would call into question, or call into the arena of discussion, I should say, that they are trying to make contact with us and really make first contact in a very graceful, sociological way. That's the theory of that idea. Well, again, go back to the Bible. There's some interesting passages in Ezekiel. There are all kinds of archaeological things that could be interpreted a certain way. All right. And now we have, tons of photographs from the 1800s up till today, although now it's a little bit more difficult to discern what's real and what's not. You definitely have a lot of special effects students doing stuff. According to some UFOologists, you have the government of the United States of America continually in dialogue with these individuals, right? But then we have tons of movies coming out making aliens look horrible. Some aliens look insectoid and they just want to rip us to shreds. Some aliens are endearing, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That although they abduct us, they bring us back at some point, having destroyed our lives and our families' lives, but boy, wasn't it worth it. You have 2001: A Space Odyssey, where an alien monolith, a machine, comes down and really gets man over certain technical humps. First teaching man how to eat red meat, then teaching man how to, first using a weapon to kill an animal, to eat red meat, to increase our visual cortex and our brain size, and to essentially defend ourselves. Sort of a violent arc of maturation. So would you say that if you were to take all of the television stories of alien visitation and all the movie stories of alien visitation, what would be the overall mean of the intent of aliens? And I'm going to say it's overwhelmingly, more than 50%, a negative situation. This recent conspiracy of last year about Planet X was completely horrid. They engineered us, but they couldn't fix their atmosphere. So they had this incredible Frankenstein biogenetics, but they couldn't fix their atmosphere. Now, the other thing is that we have this abduction thing, which, according to Whitley Strieber, had started way back in the 40s, and it was simply that the government couldn't stop it, and so they had to hide it. And again, I think the alien abduction stories have also calmed down now that the trend has been exhausted. The story arc has been exhausted. It no longer sells papers. It no longer sells magazines. It no longer sells books. Because everyone's tired of the story. And so miraculously, individuals slow down their claims of it ever occurring. But now, think about our Prime Directive. They are trying to supposedly ease us into understanding that they exist. But at the same time, they're stealing fetuses out of women. This is according to these stories that I've read. Just read Whitley Strieber's book, Majestic, where he kind of supposedly mixes truth with fiction. I think he filed the book under nonfiction. But they're somehow in need of anal probes, right? They're in need of all this sort of inferior gathering of biomatter from man. They can't work with a cadaver. They got to work with a living being. They're supposedly putting implants into our skin, right? And yeah, I've seen those videos where they have supposedly implants all over your body, behind the ear, in different parts of the arm and that kind of stuff. And, they test it for its atomic signature and say definitely not a part of Earth. Which any meteorite that falls out of space, we can test it, and it doesn't match our frequency of the plane of existence that we're on. That it has, biotissue wrapped around it, and it's not being rejected by the immune system, supposedly. But here's the thing. All those claims online are after the device has been removed from the human body. With a few sort of claims that the x-rays, there it is, it's inside the body. Right? Mostly non-videos of this occurring, non-videos of the surgery, just before and after photographs. And that's pretty damn easy. You can go out into the desert, okay, and find any rock that is black. It's a meteorite. It's how the Egyptians found all of the iron to create their embalming tools. It's how NASA got fake rocks for the moon. They went to the poles and picked up rocks in the snow, and that rocks in the snow on the surface are come from meteorites, right? So you could take one of these, heat it up, it's just iron, and mold it into a shape. They're usually pretty crude shapes, kind of a shape that a human being could easily create, however small, right? If it was this crazy razor blade crystallized star with serial numbers written the size of atoms, then we would probably have more physical proof that this was an amazing thing. But now, I want you to think through the implant thing for just a split second here. These implants have always been pretty damn large. I mean, when compared to what a microscope can see. You can see them with your naked eye, right? And so, my little bee right here, he's a little alien checking me out here. Little sweat bee. I feel like little helicopters. It doesn't seem like a supreme intelligence is involved with any of the architectures of these implants. It just doesn't seem like that's the case. And it leaves behind evidence that they exist. Except these devices don't seem to have any transmission qualities to them. There's no integrated circuits in them. They're just lumps of steel. Something you can pick out of the desert, shape in a forge, pour in a mold, push into the skin. And you could push it into the skin and it would heal, all right? And the immune system wouldn't be in a huge rejection cycle with this particular implant within 3 or 4 days of putting it subdermal, then you can start taking photographs of the thing and, take a video of pulling it out of the body. And, of course, it's all entangled in your flesh because it's not supposed to be there, and your flesh is trying to figure out what the hell this thing is. Breast implants work with your actual body, and you tuck it into muscles and stuff in your chest, and it looks real, right? So they can do it with a piece of metal as well. We have kids running around trying to get chips in their palms of their hands, or, in the web of between their index finger and their thumb. So I think that the first set of data that they are somehow visiting us and trying to warm us up to their existence, but at the same time, they're abducting us. And again, the anal probe thing, I know it sounds stupid, right? But this was a story for a long time until everyone just kind of said, that's stupid. Really? It makes a person who's been abducted a victim in a really horrendous way. It creates such a cover story that you want to know. It's like, well, geez, I don't want to get anal probe, right? Whitley Strieber, the writer, said that this happened to him so many times. I mean, I hate to think about the functionality of his body after so many anal probes, right? Crazy. But what's not happening is if the government was involved in talking to aliens and stuff, and they're here to warm us up to their existence, you would think that with all the Army Corps of PSYOPs getting, again, annually speaking, and my number is like 10 years old, it was $1.5 billion a year to lie to the world about everything, right? That they would be warming us up to aliens instead of scaring the living crap out of us. Because even the scare tactics are completely random, right? All the stories are very random. Starship Troopers with the insectoid aliens, totally different. All of the Star Trek episodes, though, portray bipedal, usually, aliens that are fairly negotiable, right? We can talk to them and they have all these crazy intents. So I think that the person that has warmed us up the most was Gene Roddenberry and company. Brandon Braga. But I don't see any evidence, any body of evidence that suggests that anyone's trying to make us feel comfortable with their arrival. Quite the opposite. Battle for Los Angeles. Absolutely not something we're excited to experience, right? So now we go to the other set of data, which is to say, well, in a way, we're aliens, right? There's anthropologists that believe we were absolutely dropped off. Absolutely dropped off. The difference between hominid and Homo sapien is massive. Go see my episode 2 on evolution, right? So we're aliens, so let's think about this. Somehow, we're on a heliocentric ball, and we fly to other heliocentric balls with other races on them. We have some prime directive methodology where we say, well, this is where the society we're talking to or looking at is at a point where we need to contact them. And I should mention that Star Trek went with warp signatures as the major sort of threshold of contacting them. There have been several ufologists that believe that it's about getting nuclear power, nuclear weapons, getting the ability to affect the space-time fabric in a way that you're starting to threaten the very integrity of reality that is this plane of existence, and any being that either lives in this plane of existence or uses it as a transverse medium to get from one place to the other doesn't want this to be screwed up. And so they come and they turn off our nuclear weapons from our silos, disarming it. They sort of taunt our pilots to let them know that they're there, and to kind of instill some sort of dominance in our consciousness such that we don't take it too far. Without really saying anything, it's almost a rhetorical, hey, we're here. Just know that we're here, and you better think about what you're about to do. Now, again, put yourself in their shoes. There is a small, infinitesimal, infinitely tiny culture in this overall giant world that believes in weaponry, that believes in scaring the people into submission. And again, there's a lot of theories that nuclear weapons didn't exist. We definitely know that a lot of the footage of the first nuclear weapons in Arizona and New Mexico and Nevada are all fake. They just are. Again, it doesn't prove one thing or the other, but It could be that they told them, hey, we don't really have these things. It's just a scare tactic to keep our guys in check. You know how the dog keeps the sheep. That's what we do. You don't have anything to worry about. It's all simulation. Until the aliens go, oh, okay. But that would mean that they supposedly misunderstood the whole thing in the begin with. Or maybe we touched on this technology and pulled back completely. Maybe the aliens took it all away. Who knows, right? But now imagine that a race that we have access to, that we are the dominant race to, starts playing with this technology that can threaten the fabric of the universe, right? Well, we have two choices. Actually, probably have more than two. But we can go in and visit them and say, knock it off. Or we can just make it not work from where we are without letting them know why their experiments aren't working. It's probably best to go down and visit them as well. But if we have such superior technology, and if they have such superior technology, and we don't seem to be getting prepared for their arrival by any stretch of the means, right? Any stretch of means. I would assume they could keep themselves out of our visual cortex, right? They could keep their ships out of our view. They could stay off of our radars. They might say, well, it's just their hubris. Their hubris is such that they own it. We are simply rats in a cage. They can come and go willy-nilly, do whatever they like. And maybe that's the case as well. You know, there's lots of rumors about them being at the bottom of the ocean, sort of the abyss storyline. There are stories about them living in the subterranean caves underneath Earth, and they're more just sort of bizarrely feral, but with amazing technology where they can wave their hands over their chests and big, laser beams come out and strike human beings, right? These stories never seem to pan out logically. There's the guy, I think his name's Phil, I can't remember his last name, but he was the guy that said that he was helping to build these tunnels that are all underneath the United States for the military, and that they bumped into this cavern with all these gray and beige aliens down there. And he said they went down there and it's all black because they have these big eyes and they could see in the dark. And he said that that the place, they're swimming in their own feces, so the place smelled atrocious. But they have, again, this technology where they can wave their hand over their chest, and one of his sidekick, who was a military guy, opens fire on these guys out of sheer fear that they waved a hand over their chest, and a beam hit that guy and shocked him to death, fried him alive, and that the beam crawled over to this other guy's hand and burned off a bunch of his fingers, which in the presentation he does in front of a podium about 95. You see a really mangled hand, and he shows a bullet wound that he has from being supposedly chased down by the government. Of course, they miss, so don't kill him and don't continue pursuing him, which is just doesn't make any sense. They don't miss. Okay, they might miss, but they'll keep coming until you're gone. They don't wait. But this guy was eventually shot to death a few years later after this presentation. Really weird, right? But his presentation kind of falls apart as it keeps going. He starts trying to tell you that a human being in a photograph was an alien. Now, there are old science fiction stories about what aliens are always trying to do, and a bunch of these old stories were resurrected for the Planet X theory last year. For those of you not familiar with Planet X theory, because there's Planet X theories that have been around since I was a kid. They call any of the planets that they believe are at the end of our solar system, because they feel the gravitational force of some other body out there on the planets, and they say, well, there's got to be something else out there, but we can't see it, so they call it Planet X, right? But this other Planet X theory is completely different, and it has to do with a star that is slightly smaller than our star, that has a mini solar system in the whole solar system of Nemesis, which is what the star is called. Doesn't that sound forbidding? Or formidable? It orbits in a really long cycle with our solar system, and that this thing is supposedly coming into our solar system, and it's going to collide with things, it's going to wreak havoc, but supposedly just, there's a lot of space in space, right? It's going to miss us, but there's a planet that encircles Nemesis called Nibiru, and Nibiru is an Earth-like planet supposedly full of these aliens that, again, have all these anomalies with their atmosphere and their planet. They should be all dead by now. This is kind of the way it works. But they came to Earth. They genetically engineered the hominid, which is sort of like your Bigfoot type character in your old primitive primates, apes and things, and they created human beings, Homo sapiens, redesign our, I'm giving you other anthropological assertions, not the Planet X assertion, but they have all this technology. They become the Atlanteans, they become the Lemurians, which is the Pacific version of the Atlanteans, and they were creating us to create a slave race to mine all the gold out of the surface of our planet, such that they could take the gold back to Nibiru and fix their atmosphere. That's literally the story, okay? And this proximity to us is going to bring in a bunch of meteorites, and it's going to slam into Earth. And I'll just tell you, if any of this were to happen, our solar system would be toast. But now, again, I've kind of picked this apart on episodes many, many moons ago, but just we're on the subject. The idea is that this race exists on this planet. They have sort of interplanetary travel capabilities, right? They've built a spaceship that can take off out of their planet, their heliocentric ball, come to our ball, land, set up shop for a long time, people, right? We're not talking about an overnight thing here. And they can genetically modify these hominids, these prehistoric indigenous creatures, to be kind of a hybrid between them and us, and somehow educate us up quickly such that we can know what gold is and mine this stuff out of the ground and do all this crazy stuff, right? Talking about, in basic evolutionary theory, even if God made the whole universe, you're talking about thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not millions of years to get this thing all set up and going. Right. But what's the whole story based on? The whole story is based on that this planet has got an indigenous race that's that smart, but they can't make gold with a machine. Guys, gold is just an element of the universe, all right? An atomic element, in its most basic sense, if any of what we've been taught about chemistry is correct, which I think we can assume is pretty damn correct, you're pushing and prodding protons, electrons, neutrons into orbit around each other, into the core, using energy, and you can make anything you want, right? We just had an article that I posted on the Facebook page, Deep Thoughts Radio, that talked about how a bacteria was transformed another element. I can't remember what it was initially, but a bacteria transformed an element into gold. There's a big, giant gold nugget in this photograph, which I don't know if is claimed as being the thing that was created by this bacteria, but it's pretty damn convincing, man. So if you had this superior knowledge to travel the stars, or at least travel the planets, and you have the superior technology to gene splice two non-compatible species together and leave us with, we've got Chinese people, black people, white people, all these different races on Earth, right? We can all intermingle and breed because we are part of the master species of what we are, Homo sapien. Then you have to assume they could handle their atmospheric problems. But this is man creating a ridiculous story to somehow usurp the intent of aliens, right? It's always some stupid story. Just like religions. When you really break it down, any God that is defined by man lacks anything godly. In fact, it lacks anything that defies the imagination of man, besides to say, well, in fact, the only time I ever see God defined as a God, and it's sort of a petty example, is that when anything happens to you that you don't like, they say that phrase, well, God works in mysterious ways. And that's just, oh, okay, so blank check, burp, right? So on this show, I try to evenly represent the evidence that seems to suggest that our space organizations are lying to us left and right. And so trusting anything that they say is actually really, really tough. I just watched a video this morning. It's about 35 minutes of a Stanford student who works in, I guess you could say, kind of a budding aerospace discipline. And he called up NASA and said, it's really funny how you guys don't have in your database, the international database of all things space, the launch of the Hubble telescope in your database. Like, it was never said to have ever gone up. The maintenance rendezvous are definitely in there, but that no one's really... People have worked on the Hubble Space Telescope for 25 years, supposedly taking data from it, and no one's ever seen it live with a camera. And this guy made a bunch of amazing arguments about, hey, if you lost communication with the Hubble, you would definitely want a picture of it because maybe it got hit by something. So that you would never launch a $1.5 billion telescope that's 40 feet long into space without having the ability to optically look at it, because it's $1.5 billion of hardware and research and hard work. And he had this guy pinned down on the telephone, and it was pretty amazing, right? But what I'm getting at is the fact that there is now an interesting body of evidence that we talk about on the show frequently about potentially being inside of a petri dish that is known as flat Earth. Again, it's not anything to do with, the Kansas album covers with the ship falling off the edge of the Earth. If you really want to know what this is all about, check episode, is it 51? It's Flat Earth, and then 98, which is the firmament episode, and it gets really interesting really fast. But so if we're in a firmament petri dish, again, we could still be on a ball, we could still be somewhere in space, but we are currently inside some sort of container. The alien intent suddenly becomes a little bit different. That maybe we are truly a sociological experiment, but it's still, I should say, in that setting, aliens ever being caught doing anything doesn't make any sense at all, because you're polluting your sociological results. If you go just take basic sociology 101, you'll very quickly realize that a group of people that knows they're being observed behave completely different than a group that doesn't know they're being observed. And so visiting would only make sense if you're about to blow the lid off of what you're doing, or you're about to reset everything and everyone who saw you would be erased from history. But if you look at Ezekiel, and if that were true, if all the the flying chariots and all that stuff were part of the scam, then that's been around for, which is the scam of them watching us. I shouldn't say scam, but the truth of them watching us, then they've blown their cover a long, long time ago. But the subject of aliens, the reason why I want to do this episode is that the subject of aliens is growing sort of quiet, It's interesting how when the world and the world politics rises up and people go, you know what, I really don't give a shit about these aliens. What I'm curious about is how does money made? Who runs the world? Why is it that every time I'm taught that something is wrong with the world, it's never money, but money is the root of all things that either happen good in this world or bad in this world, right? Where are the new claims of aliens? Where's the new body of evidence? Why is it that with virtually every citizen on this ball or in this firmament who has a high-definition camera in their phone, if they've had a camera for the last 10 years, they've got essentially a camera that is, 10 to 100 times more complex in terms of pixel density than a 35mm fuzzy-ass negative. And yet, as the printing press killed prophecy and prophets and magicians from space, from God, right? These cameras are essentially erasing the myth of aliens. Again, except for this flying wedge over Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, right? That's probably the neatest one I've seen recently. But then it just mysteriously disappears into a cloud. It's a husband and wife, and the wife actually records this. And again, husband and wife watching this flying wedge in the sky, and the husband doesn't think to pull out his camera, because then we could triangulate their two pieces of footage. But it's always something that's pretty easily proved away. The other body evidence is that a few weeks earlier, a month earlier, something like that, the same object was supposedly photographed from a high-definition digital camera with a zoom, and the object is definitely the same object. But again, it's nothing conclusive. They say, all these people, dozens of people saw this flying wedge. But again, with a bunch of cameras in everyone's hands, no one thinks to take a photograph of this thing, except for two people, separated by a month. Some of you might think, well, they are participating. They do participate with our government. It's all covert. It's going to take hundreds of years to make this thing happen. But in the end, you're talking about the way the world is being run. It doesn't look like aliens are participating much. The only aliens that are kept up in the conspiracy side of things are these interdimensional aliens that are supposedly running the world in a very reptilian way, very non-empathetic way. And it is massaging the entire world into a tyrannical machine, right? But it seems very human. It seems very frail. It seems that if you had superior technology, this would go a lot faster. And there'd be a lot less mistakes by these people. You have our government trying to take away our guns in America. All right, well, we've already been told these stories about how UFOs fly over missile silos and disable them. Okay. Well, that sounds pretty difficult, doesn't it? Well, if an alien was going to want to disarm the world, wouldn't they just fly around the world a few times and get all RPGs and pistols and, if nothing else, just make all the ammunition evaporate or cease to function? And the next time a police officer goes out and tries to fire a weapon, it's just a big dud. Next time a soldier goes on the battlefield, it just is a big dud. That's not happening either, is it? So there doesn't seem to be any evidence of this sort of participation for good or for evil, right? I think most of us would agree that George Soros acts very human, massively greedy, alien intent. This has just been an exercise in sort of melding together all of the low-hanging fruit stories about such a thing, because I think it doesn't make a lot of sense, quite frankly. And I think it would. I think it would make a lot of sense. Well, if you made it this far, you are a trooper. Hopefully this was interesting, and I'm looking forward to your thoughts. Part of making an episode like this is just to open up all of your thought processes about this, to make you have an epiphany that I'm talking about something fairly basic and you have the advanced thought, and you can post it down below and just say, look, if you thought about this, or maybe it's this. So we have a lot of great thinkers who watch the show, and so if you guys come up with anything that's your epiphany, please do share it, and share other videos too, because that's been a huge component of me doing other episodes. And I'll sometimes take your video from YouTube and I'll post it on the Facebook page, right? So let's try to crack this. Let's try to crack out another theory of aliens that makes all the data sets make sense, either by absolving their validity or validating them in a new way that no one's ever thought about before. If you're a scientist and you believe in a heliocentric ball and we're floating in space, then I think that you have to deduce that aliens definitely exist in the universe. Whether or not they can travel through the stars interdimensionally or faster than the speed of light or whatever, well, maybe. I will say before I close off, a very close friend of mine, I think I've shared this before in one of the previous episodes, but my biggest piece of evidence that there's something out there that's advanced, really, really advanced, is that a buddy of mine who's in his 70s now, his father was a test pilot back during World War II in the 50s, and he said he was flying really high altitude at one point, don't know how high, and a big giant disc flew right up next to his plane, and it had a sort of a strobe, almost disco light in a little perforated line that went around the outer edge, and it was constantly rotating. And he said this thing was much bigger than his jet, which would pretty much put it at 30, 40 feet in diameter. The guy waited until his deathbed pretty much to tell his son this story. So he wasn't excited about telling a story that might make him look crazy, which should tell you that it wasn't a fictional story. He saw this thing, and pilots are known for fantastic eyesight, super duper IQs, and just having obviously a hand-eye coordination that's above and beyond the most of us, right? And that's who this guy was. And this guy, raised his kid near Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, he saw the effects of the destruction of man. So he had seen the world in a way that most of us hadn't seen it. Even my buddy was raised and was driven down the streets of Ground Zero of where these bombs had landed and destroyed everything, right? Consequently, he said that the Japanese of the area hadn't seen many Americans at the time, and so they would fawn over their blonde hair and their white skin and just their being, like they were gods or something. Really strange, unrelated, but interesting observation, interesting experience of his. So I do believe that there might be either an indigenous race that lives with us that we don't see until we get higher in the atmosphere. It could be like fish, for all we know. They just live up there, right? Or it could be this is a craft and someone is actually in it because it's big enough to harbor at least some sort of living being. Anyway, if you made it this far, thanks for listening. If you haven't gone already, go to mkultraradio.com. The main thing you get from there is the audio. If you're coming in through video, there's audio for your podcast listener. It's also on iTunes. You have to look up MK Ultra Radio. If you forget to put radio on there, you get a whole different show inside iTunes. But again, if you're coming through audio and you want to see the video, knock yourself out. There are links to our 2 Facebook pages. The MK Ultra Radio Facebook page is more political, and this show is more sort of I like to think a more serious coast to coast sort of show on the Facebook. We talk about health and science and that kind of stuff on the Facebook side of things. But anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. I will see you in the next episode. Take care of yourself and someone else. Over now.